Hello everyone, welcome back. This is our second and last session for this Impact Symposium. So we have four great presentations followed by a closing remark by Maria. I will, just to keep everything in time, I will signal each speaker when 1 minute is left. So it's a 15-minute talk with 5 minutes reserved for question and answer. So at 14 minutes, I will let you know that 1 minute is left. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands from your reaction tab or put them in the chat box, and then we'll get it to the speaker. With that, without much further ado, I will ask Doug, who will present what we have been doing in the field of energy and where we are heading with that. Doug, over to you.
So this is one of the bigger themes in the center. So with more than a dozen chief investigators spread across 4, sometimes 5 nodes, there's a lot has been going on. And I thought rather than trying to pick the eyes out of what we've been doing, inevitably ignore some important work that somebody is very fond of, I thought I would take very much a helicopter view and talk about sort of where we started and why we started, and how it evolved, what the new opportunities and the new issues that arose were, and then where we are now and where we think it's all headed in the future. So with that in mind, yes. So this is a diagram that's going to build. This is more or less where we started, and when we started conceiving of this particular variation of the center, the new generation center, the next generation center, it was almost 12 years ago, sorry, 10 years ago, and we conceived of these main points as being the vision as we saw it in 2012 of the big issues going forward in energy in that part of the last decade. We thought that thermal energy, and especially thermal energy conversion, was an important topic that seemed to be under investigated, underdeveloped, especially in the generation sense of, can we turn simply the vast quantity of thermal energy that rains down on the planet and is available underneath the surface of the planet into something useful. Having worked, many of us having worked on a variety of battery topics over the previous decade, in the previous iteration of the center, we realized that the next generation needed to be less expensive types of battery systems. So moving on from lithium to post-lithium type technologies, for example, sodium, some aspects of next gen flow batteries, and in particular, trying to do the most out of what you can with an air battery concept. In other words, one of the electrodes operating on air. At the same time, we recognized that with vast quantities of renewables available, potentially CO2 reduction using those electrons to reduce CO2 to useful materials would be an important stepping stone in the future. And underpinning much of that, underpinning both of, if not all 3 of those previous points, was our previous quite successful track record in water splitting, especially the focus on the water oxidation aspect of that, the anode reaction, which is the only sustainable oxidation reaction in any of the previous processes that you might conceive of. So it was itself an important topic, but it also underpins everything that I've said elsewhere in this slide. So that's kind of why we got into what we got into. I thought I'd move this forward in 5-year chunks. So how did this evolve into, this is about the middle of the center then, 2017. The green are things that have sort of developed in a good way, and the red are issues or other points of view, perspectives, if you like, that are emerging that maybe were, let's say, challenging. So these are opportunities and challenges color coded here. So what was emerging as we were beginning to work, or in the middle of working on thermal energy conversion, was the huge potential and importance of thermal energy storage. In other words, not just turning the thermal energy into something, but actually storing it for future use in some way or other. Say more about that in a moment. in the battery area, one of the things that was emerging there was emerging through our interaction with the EPPE group, Linda and colleagues. For example, I think that work really started off examining the ethical supply chain issue, as it's become very much more front of mind in recent times. The issue with cobalt, and then even the issue with lithium, and sort of partly emerging out of some of those discussions, but just emerging generally, and this becomes an all pervasive part of our thinking, is circularity. Circularity at that time was being used in all sorts of ways: economic models, political models. It's a word that probably got overused, but in the context of sustainable chemistry, it's got a very clear meaning, which is that we really need to sort of understand the importance of circularity in our chemical systems, and ideally, all our chemical systems should be circular. Now, that's a huge goal that I've just set for ourselves there, but it's a stepping stone, and we have to think about it. In the CO2 reduction area, we were beginning to realize that it was important to understand the CO2 source that we were going to reduce. If we were simply taking fossil carbon from some other process, such as natural gas refining, which produces a lot of CO2 before it ever hits the pipeline, and then turning that into a fuel, and then ultimately the fuel was burnt and the carbon was emitted, it still ended up being emitted. So the CO2 source ended up being a severely limiting factor in that technology, unless it was going to be combined with air capture of CO2 or a closed cycle system. So the thinking around where these things might be applied, I think, became a much more critical point of discussion, shall we say, in that work. And there is something that emerges, I think, from that thinking process in the future. Around that time, again, influenced by a number of the centre's broader EPPE participants, we began to realize that much of what we had been doing in this electrolysis area, both water splitting and CO2 reduction, could also be applied to the massive problem revolving around nitrogen reduction to ammonia, as is used today to produce our fertilizers. So we began to get into that, or we were getting into that around about that time. And in the water splitting area, the issue that was starting to emerge at that point was, well, yes, electrolysis hydrogen becoming a well-established technology, but how do we store and transport that? Is really the hydrogen economy going to be restricted by the storage and transportation problem? So then if we fast forward to kind of where the centre has gotten to, and I'll take a few moments to step through this slide with some sidelines too. So the thermal energy storage area, and I'm not going to try to drill down into the numbers of papers and number of students and so on, because there's hundreds of papers here and dozens of patents and dozens of students all involved in all of these outcomes. In the thermal energy and storage area, the storage has become an even bigger part of the story, and that's ended up producing some patents and a linkage project. The linkage project is focused on storing thermal energy, but in that process and linking up with another local company called Torque, the concept is now expanded, to, believe it or not, to include storing excess wind energy, electrical energy, as heat, and then turning it back into electrical energy. And if that needs more explaining, I'm happy to do so, but it's quite a surprising concept, and yet it's actually a very, very smart concept coming from those Torque guys, based around the storage work that we've been doing. In the battery area, lots of good papers and patents developing there from the centre's work. Of course, the training centre and industry transformation training centre emerged under Maria's leadership. Also at Deakin, substantial funding from the university and the state government to establish and then further expand the battery hub there for manufacturing batteries in small scale, and an important CRCP that seems to be going from strength to strength with Calix, the company called Calix locally. So again, the ethical supply chain aspect of that has emerged into a clear focus that is an emerging research area, I think, in much of what we talk about here, which is recycling of battery materials. And that's not a new area, but it's becoming an important aspect of research and a design aspect in terms of future battery technologies. Both sodium and flow and battery outcomes, I think, have got future, so to speak. And while metal air still is tantalizingly possible, it probably needs a clear application area to push it forward, so to speak, out of the centre's developments. In the CO2 reduction area, one of the emerging sort of answers to the CO2 source conundrum is, of course, bio-CO2. In a lot of bioreactors producing various bio materials, bio-outcomes, CO2 is a byproduct. So that is what you might call bio-CO2, and funneled in at large quantity into an appropriate electrolysis cell, then that could be a way of making valuable carbon compounds. And I think that fits into the bigger picture of our energy future, that technology enables bio-CO2 to join other forms of fuels and energy. During that last 5 years, the nitrogen reduction to ammonia has become an even bigger aspect of what we do. And in recent times, in the year just past, we've had a paper in Science, we've had papers in Nature Catalysis, and quite a portfolio of patents building up now. I'm sort of going backwards in time in this list. The ARENA grant has been running now for 3 years. All of that produced a spin out in the last 12 months. And we're waiting at the moment on news, hopefully, of a CRCP with a number of large Australian corporate partners who are very enthusiastic. And one of our recent achievements, this is even since the Science paper, recently managed to achieve 100% selectivity, electrochemical selectivity in that process, which is an important stepping stone, I think. And partly as a result of that, then being able to demonstrate the production of fertilizers and potentially fuels from that process. And as a little sideline, let me just show you what we thought was a bit of a red letter day just before Christmas passed. So the whole initial concept here is changing fertilizers from what they are today, which is a fossil fuel product. So all of our food is a fossil fuel product for the most part, turning those sustainable. And here we had a little ceremonial moment just before Christmas of a sample of a fertilizer material made from our electrolysis process in the lab using genuinely solar power off the roof. And there I am pouring it. You probably can see, I barely see what I'm doing, pouring it onto a very brave cucumber plant. And then just after Christmas, there they are. We're just preparing to eat those. Equally brave, some would say. But I'm here to say that it didn't kill us. Okay, going back to the serious part of this. Of course, Nox emissions and then circularity remains an issue. And I can talk a lot more about that, but that's a major discussion. We always talk about that whenever we talk about this ammonia area. And the water splitting area has continued to develop, and it's now being seen as a solution to the ammonia is being seen as a solution to the H2 transportation issue, if you like. So there's an answer emerging there. So then, to crystal ball gaze, and I thought I would not try to gaze only 5 years ahead. I know it's easier to gaze 10 years ahead on this slide. And then here is a sort of a view that has hydrogen and ammonia, all coming from renewables, of course, battery storage in that picture somewhere. Thinking of the sort of the global picture of energy in large population centers. This is more focused on how it might work for Asia and Central and Western Europe than and parts of the US, and it is Australia, where probably we can all have our own distributed generation of renewables to satisfy our needs. But in terms of seaborne energy, probably it's going to be ammonia, fitting in with the hydrogen cycle, feeding all of these different things. Biofuels produced from bio-CO2 probably an important source of those very, very valuable hydrocarbons that we need to fly around the world on. As I've often said, electric planes, yes, for very short flights. Ammonia is probably Melbourne to Sydney and Melbourne to Brisbane, but certainly not Melbourne to London. It's just too much energy to carry in ammonia, too heavy, and therefore we're still going to need jet fuel, and that jet fuel will hopefully be a biofuel type source, and there's a number of ways of getting that biofuel as a jet fuel into that.
1 minute.
Perfect. So clearly, as you can see, we tried to in this slide, embody this idea of circularity. There's an important sort of set of discussions around circularity in the nitrogen cycle. We mustn't ever, especially in a dry country like Australia, forget the water cycle, which is the bottom part of that. So where's the water coming from here? And I sort of skipped over the point that in the water splitting area, we've got a project with Woodside looking at seawater electrolysis as a way of making hydrogen or ammonia from seawater, which is a challenge, therefore, to exclude chlorine generation at the anode. So that's my overview, if you like, of where we've been and how we got to where we are and how this might evolve in the future. And I'm happy to say more and discuss more. Any questions are very welcome.
Thank you, Doug. So we have first question from Praneshwar. What could be the future of solid state batteries compared to flow batteries or lithium ion batteries?
I think this is a case of horses for courses. So flow batteries have this intrinsic advantage that they can be scaled up without scaling up some of the expensive components, which are the actual cell, the electrodes and the gear within the cell. If you want to double the size of your flow battery, you just have to double the size of the tank. So at some point of scale, if you were to draw this on a graph of size versus cost, whereas traditional, if you like, fixed batteries, lithium, even sodium, etc., would scale more or less linearly. The bigger the battery, the price scales with accordingly. In the case of the flow battery, that's not the case. The battery does not scale linearly. Price doesn't scale with size. Price will scale less than linearly. So at some point or other, there would usually be a crossover where that would become the preferred mode. And I do know one big mining company that for its local, for most of those mines out west have got plenty of wind and solar. They just need to store it. And the ideal in their mind could well be flow. Right. So the flow, I think, will find its way into certain applications at scale.
We have another question from Gordon. Is nitrogen to ammonia the one to put the money on for returns in the next 5 years?
Sorry, what now? Let me just, is that in the chat? What was that?
Yeah.
Word in something in the next 5 years? Want to put money on returns in the next 5 years? No, of course, I think the answer is no, Gordon, because I think 5 years is too short a time frame probably for that to really take off, especially what you might call the Gen 3 that we've all been working on, the electrochemical mode. The Gen 2 that I mentioned on my slide, which is just feeding green hydrogen into traditional Haber-Bosch plants, that's going to dominate for some time, right? So it'll be therefore some time before Gen 3 manages to sort of poke its head through the soil. And of course, fertilizers are really where that might happen. So 5 years, in terms of getting a return, an investment return, 5 years might be challenging. But 10 years, well, that's different.
We can have one last quick question from David.
Yeah, hi, Doug. Just a quick question about solar thermal. Why do you think it's never really taken off, even though there's been years and years of research into it? That's the direct, I guess, conversion of sunlight into some kind of fuel or whatever.
Yeah, and of course, we all know that solar thermal in the form of solar hot water heaters on our roofs it's been around for forever, right?
Yeah.
So that's, the basic concept's not there. I think that if you start at that point and ask, all right, what do I have to do to make this into even more useful than just hot water for the house? Some houses do have solar boosted hydronic heating. So there's it taking a step in that direction. But to make it more useful in a domestic or an industrial energy sense, you need to be able to store, you need to be able to harvest more energy, so bigger collectors, but you need to be able to store it is the problem, and that's what. So the storage becomes the issue, and then then it comes back to the chemistry of materials, if you like. How do you design the world's best thermal energy storage material for that kind of temperature? And the work that we did showed that routinely on the roof above our labs in our solar terrace above our labs at DCF, we can get up to 180 degrees in a collector material. Some degree of solar concentration gone into that, but nothing too sophisticated. Just concave mirrors.
Okay.
So I think it's a materials chemistry problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Doug. With that, let's thank Doug. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach to him directly. And thank you, Doug. And you can use the clap function from the reactions if you want. But thank you. We'll move on to next speaker, who is David, who will talk about electromaterials research and its past, present, and future.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Doug. That was, I guess, really enlightening. And your comment about materials chemistry, well, I guess that's where we're going to now, because now we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at electromaterials in the centre, what we had, I guess, what's currently present and what might be in the future. And I just needed to remind you that in reality, in order to create the next generation of electromaterial devices, which was the ACES vision, it was centred all around 3D electromaterials. And could we produce 3D electromaterials that would provide the next generation electrochemical devices? But in doing that, we also needed to be able to do things like, we needed the tools to do that. That included modeling and characterization and fabrication. And so we had this kind of view of the 3D electromaterials theme, in which we had three types. We defined three types of electromaterials. That was structural materials, those sorts of things that were going to be the basis of a device. Reaction centers, which were typically might be catalysts, they might be cells, they might be a variety of different types of active materials. And then there were going to be electromaterials themselves, those that were conductive, those that were going to move charge around the place. But in the process, of course, we needed sophisticated characterization and modeling, and we also believed that we were going to need precise fabrication. And so all of these areas, I guess, were where we started this centre in 2014. And if you look at what we, I guess, proposed over the years, in fact, up until, I guess, in the first 4 years of the centre, in which we had two types of materials, which were basically generation 1 and 2, which is summarised on this slide. I don't want to deal with all of those and go into them, but just to show you the wide range of materials, the descriptions that we had for them, whether they were structural, electromaterial, or reaction centers, and so on, and how easily they could be fabricated. You know, we went from molecules through to polymers, through to metals and metal oxides, and things, biomaterials and cells and so on. But of course, all of those materials have then been utilized to produce the impact that ACES has produced, and that is, first of all, in those wonderful publications that Brett has talked about, that Doug has alluded to in terms of science and so on, that all of that knowledge impact that's been built up over more than 1,700 papers, 20 patents. And as Brett had mentioned, that you know, a substantial portion of those papers were now either across the nodes, or they were international, or they were through national collaborations with over 45,000 citations. But not only were those materials contributing to that knowledge, but they're also contributing to training, obviously, that it's the dealing with those electromaterials, how to make the electromaterials, how to characterize them, how to fabricate them into devices and so on. We're contributing to the training, to the networks, to the facilities, and ultimately to the translated research, as is detailed there in terms of the kinds of translation outcomes and impacts that we've had. But really today, all I've got time to do is talk about, I guess, three of those materials that have had a significant impact. So I just want to talk about today graphene, the ionic liquids, and biomaterials, and mention some of the impacts that those materials have had. The graphene research started with the seminal paper that listed in yellow up the top there that was in Nature Nanotechnology in 2008 that Gordon and Rick, who's online, welcome Rick and Dan Lee, put together in 2008, and has now had over 7,500 citations. And it really is one of the seminal papers in producing graphene dispersions. And so that highlights really that line across the top here in which we go from graphite through to graphene dispersions and then to graphene applications. And I won't talk about the applications that we've had in the centre and the papers that have been discussed, but one of the things that did happen was that led to the setup of a spin-off, well, not a spin-off company, I should say, but a separate company that was set up by Chris Gilby called Intelligent Materials. It was founded in 2014 using commercial licensing of that graphene, I guess, manufacturing technology that was developed here by ACES. And so that was a really significant outcome for that early graphene work. As the graphene discussions went on, one of the things that was apparent was we needed to have a graphene which we could manipulate, we could fabricate, that we could use that precise fabrication to make devices with. And that was where Ali Jalali did his PhD in looking at the larger scale graphene shown there, liquid crystalline graphene oxide, producing a much bigger platelet up to 50 microns, as you can see there, of graphene. That meant the graphene then in solution was much more viscous, for example, and therefore you could print it, you could spin it, you can do all sorts of things with it. And that's produced some fantastic impacts. In particular, for example, Ali worked with Gordon and collaborators in University of Texas, Houston, Mario Romero Ortega's group, where they started to see the potential for taking this highly conductive material that was flexible and that was organic, that would better integrate with, for example, the brain, and that you could make a brain probe as a neural recording microelectrode, or use it, as Mario has done in more recent times, to wrap around nerve cells, as the picture on the right shows there, to create what Gordon has so elegantly described as the sutrode. This has now moved not only just from some fantastic research that's been published, attracting the world to these types of new flexible electrodes, but also moved into the area of electroceuticals and led to the patented sutrode technology being licensed in the States to a spin-out company. We also utilized the liquid crystalline graphene oxide, these large sheets, which created a better foundation for a CO2 reducing catalyst, cationic porphyrins, and had a fantastic student in Jay Choi, who did a lot of this work, then moved down to work with Doug on the ammonia project. It is now in Korea, back home in Korea, I should say. But this was a really nice piece of work in which he produced the first, I guess, hydrogel, porphyrin-based hydrogel, which was very efficient in terms of CO2 reduction. And then I just wanted to mention another piece of work that was done by one of the PIs in the center, Professor Hyunjun Kim, who'd been working with Jeff and Gordon for a number of years, continued to work in the center, but saw the opportunities with this type of graphene to be able to produce fibers and to utilize its properties, these large sheets properties, which allowed it to produce some strength in these tough fibers. And this is just one of a number of papers that came out in relation to the liquid crystalline graphene oxide work. Well, one of the things that happens, of course, as you work on materials is that work impacts on the work. So I've entitled this Graphene's Impact on Graphene. And the thing that was notable throughout this work, as of course Imagine took the graphene technology and tried to scale up what was a really multi-step process. I mean, there was about 30 steps if you think about what you had to do to get that graphene into dispersion. And you ended up with low concentration dispersions of 0.5 milligram per mil. So were we able to take either synthetic or natural graphite and do a direct edge oxidation and produce what we eventually have called edge functionalized graphene, EFG, and produce quite a different material that was commercially scalable. And this was initially investigated by Ali Jalali along with one of the Electromaterials researchers, Ashley, and they worked together to produce, well, Ashley came up with the chemistry, the oxidation chemistry, and together they worked together to come up with this EFG, and it was ultimately patented in 2019 with ongoing work with other postdocs, Greg Ryder and Faisal, who have worked to further this. But to produce a material which is completely fascinating is now a new type of graphene, which is taking us into the future, because it's a material that we can produce a powder. And we can produce a powder because it does not want to aggregate so easily, because it's a different type of graphene. We can produce large-scale dispersions, more than 200 times the CCG type dispersion. Instead of being about 0.5 milligram per mil, this is now 100 milligrams per mil. We can produce pastes, and we can produce doughs, which is quite amazing, because these doughs take up it's an amphiphilic dough. It takes up both hydrophilic materials as well as hydrophobic materials. So it's quite an extraordinary material. And what this has led to in terms of impact is the worldwide patents have now been taken out by Sakona, Sakona Battery Technologies, a local startup who are now looking to utilize the material as a battery additive, but also utilize the fact that we can make great dispersions of this material. And these dispersions have a significant effect on thermal conductivity of aqueous solutions. So if we can produce EFG at a reasonable cost, and we think we can, then we can produce a material that might have great implications in terms of the cooling of computer systems and so on worldwide. That would produce, let's say, a 20% reduction in the efficiency, or sorry, a 20% improvement in the efficiency of cooling dispersions. And so that really has huge commercial potential. And we're currently exploring that in a 2-year research contract with Sakona. And so that's really part of the future for the graphene research that has stemmed all the way from 2008 to now. But this material, this incredible material, has also found some really niche application areas, certainly in the soft robotics area, that has been looking to make different types of neural cuffs, or sutrodes, if you like to call them that, where you're putting this EFG into PDMS polymers. The EFG works really well with a whole variety of different materials. And so we've been able to make composites with HDPE, and we're looking at those in terms of space research. We're looking at EFG latex in terms of working, looking at sensing type materials in the mining industry. We've utilized the EFG as a dough using Ionic Liquids to make capacitors, which we've then worked with Paul de Steur at the University of Newcastle to integrate them into his organic solar cells. So we now have that storage capability shown here, 2 capacitors shown here linked together in a series on the back of a plastic solar cell, which is of course the underside there and not shown. And Jun Chen has also put this material into thermocells. And so the graphene has started to impact across the board in terms of energy and in terms of composites and so on. Well, we certainly think there's a huge future in graphene, but there's probably an equally huge future in the ionic liquid research that has been done in the centre. And I really can't say too much about this. There's just been fantastic outcomes. And of course, I can't go through them all. But not only is in the Ionic Liquids, which has been, I guess, headed by Doug and Maria and Jenny, and produced just fantastic outcomes in terms of the types of materials, the types of Ionic liquid materials produced by ACES really over the last, not just the last 7 years, but the last 15 or 16 years, really, producing all types of new materials, in terms of the biocompatible IOLs, the ionogels, the polymerized IOLs, and so on, and even now having a huge impact in producing a textbook on IOLs, and then taking those materials and putting them into such a wide range of applications, energy storage applications, but also in, Doug was referring to a science paper in which is we'll come back to in a minute, utilizes a phosphonium salt ionic liquid, and so on. So really, there's just been a massive impact both locally and nationally and internationally in terms of the ionic liquids. And on the left there is the work that Doug has done, and you mentioned before, in which they've shown this improvement in electrosynthesis of ammonia using an ionic liquid phosphonium proton shuttle. And this, of course, has then led to the impact of the spin-out company Jupiter Ionics and so on. On the right is the dye-sensitized solar cell ionic liquids that Jenny and I did with P.I. Gouldy. And then there's the work with thermocells that both Jenny has done, Jun Chen and so on, and others. So there has been a huge impact from the ionic liquid
1 minute.
materials. Thank you. In the terms of the stored energy, Doug mentioned that Maria had set up the ARC Training Centre. That's really a direct result of the ionic liquids, as well as ionic liquids have contributed hugely to the battery hub. I did want to mention the fact that ionic liquids had been the basis of modelling, and that modelling had also produced some other fantastic things in the centre. And I do have to mention that, we have all sorts of impacts, and one of the impacts was that Naomi Hayworth, who was part of that new area that was generated by Michelle Coote on electrostatic catalysis of Diels order, that she passed away in 2019. Of course, that was a tragic impact for the centre. We'll gloss over the fabrication impacts. We've talked about the things that are needed to fabricate materials, and of course, there's Vipul's work himself. But I do want to briefly talk about biomaterials. There's been such an incredible use of biomaterials. The brain on the bench has been mentioned. This, of course, couldn't have been done without the sort of biomaterials that were developed here in terms of the peptide modified gel and gum, for example, that was used for this brain on the bench. For the other kinds of materials that developed for bioinks, a whole variety of them, including materials that were obtained from Pia Winberg, who runs a company producing seaweed and from which olvans are isolated. And so a whole lot of these photo cross-linking biomaterials have been developed in the centre. And those materials, those bioinks, have now been used across a wide range of those biofabrication tools that have been developed in terms of the trying to print materials using these bioinks. And so those have been just simply outstanding impacts for the centre, and leading to not only things like the battery hub, where we mentioned the ionic liquids, but in the biomaterials case, of course, TRICEP, which has a future way beyond the centre, and the Aikenhead Centre for Medical Discovery, which will impact, of course, hugely on the future of Australian science. So really, in this short period of time, I wanted to just mention the fact that, through Electromaterials, there have just been incredible impacts across the areas, the technical and areas that we've looked at in the centre. But the key message that's come out of it, that ACES has not only changed the way that electromaterials research is done, but has also demonstrated how to do it. And finally, I'd just like to thank everybody in the centre. Note again that we had another impact, I guess, in the centre with the loss of one of the CIs, Leon Spikier, who passed away in 2016. And so I guess Leon had a huge impact on all of us and on the centre. I certainly personally have had a fantastic time being part of the centre for, I guess, 16 years now. But I also want to thank Gordon and Maria for leading the centre, and all the other CIs, PIs and AIs for making the electromaterials area and so successful. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Vipul.
Thank you, David. We can have one or two quick questions. So if we don't have any questions, in the interest of time, we'll move on.
Sure.
Any question? Okay, so yeah, so if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach to David directly, but in the interest of time, we will move on.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, David. And our next speaker is Simon, who will talk about delivering goods. I guess he's not talking about courier service, but we'll see. Oh, what do you, Simon?
Great, thanks, Vipul. Yeah, absolutely. I've invented the Swinburne Uber Eats and Deliveroo for research. This is what happens when you don't provide a title in time. Gordon gives you one. So he's calling it delivering the goods, but I'll call it impact at Swinburne and beyond, and the effect that ACES has had on research activities within Swinburne and beyond. So I started life in this latest Centre of Excellence employed at the University of Wollongong, and then quite soon after the centre was launched, I was recruited down to Swinburne and took a position down there. So brought some of the activities down there, and through the great support of Swinburne University financially and facilities-wise, and also support from ACES with funding, we were able to set up a small little group of us down there doing some work and interacting across a couple of themes within ACES. So on my opening slide here, you'll see the ACES logos. We all know the Swinburne, but the other one you'll see up there is the ACMD. And David just mentioned ACMD right at the end there. If he's talking, you've probably all heard Gordon talk about ACMD, but it's actually coming to fruition now. It's been a long time in the process, this ACMD. It's 9 partner universities and a few research institutes, and out of the ACES partners, we have Swinburne, Wollongong Uni, and Uni of Melbourne as financial partners in ACMD. So work that we're doing within ACES with those partners will definitely continue to go ahead and grow and incorporate other partners as well under the ACMD banner. ACMD is Aikenhead Centre for Medical Discovery, and as David already said, it's the first hospital-based bioengineering medical devices and sort of research institute within a hospital. So it's an exciting time. And the reason I've got it up there is a lot of the research that I'm going to show from my group, probably 90% of all the work and the data generated for the publications and patents has been done at a pilot facility called what we call BioFab 3D, which was the sort of pilot showcase of what the larger ACMD could do. So it's a small lab facility at St. Vincent's Hospital where we have 5 partner universities all co-inhabiting there with their students. So that's why I've got the logo up there on the first page. So this is the team at Swinburne. So a little bit like you, Taz, we're not a very large team, and it's a bit daunting coming after Doug and after David, where they're outlining a massive amount of impressive research by a very, very large and talented team. We're a talented team, but we're not overly large. So we have myself there with the node leader at Swinburne, and then we have Simon Miraz. He's a postdoc, and he was an ACES AI. And then the others there are students who some have graduated and gone on. So we have Daniela. She graduated in 2020 with her thesis title there. And then we have Lilith. She graduated 2019. So they were the first. Lilith was the first. Daniela was the second Swinburne ACES graduates. And then we have Sean, who started around the same time as Daniela and Lilith, and his thesis is still under examination. And then we've got 2 current students, Adriana and Alex. Alex is is into his 3rd year now, and Adriana's just coming about halfway through her PhD studies. And their titles of their thesis you can see there. So just sort of give an impact snapshot of what we've been able to achieve since 2014 down at Swinburne. So we've generated 24 ACES affiliated publications with around 350 citations. And what I'm really happy about with these publications is that every single publication we have has multiple ACES partner authors. So it's been great to be able to interact across the different partner institutions to get these publications out. And without doubt, having that multidisciplinary partnered team, your research certainly has more impact. We've been fortunate to get 4 patents in that time, and the students throughout their time, we've been able to get university research awards. Students have been able to get ANF travel grants. We've had a little bit of media, thanks to the work of the Swinburne media team. So we've had 14 sort of media appearances in different forms, print, online, and TV, all sort of promoting the work being done at Swinburne and Greater ACES. Lilith's been very fortunate to be able to get what St. Vincent's dish out called a research endowment fund. So they're $20,000 grants. And so she's been successful in getting 2 of those grants. And that's been in partnership with the University of Melbourne team, Peter Chung and the guys working on the cartilage project. And then we've also had some success in grants. We were able to get a ARCDP. We've got some Cancer Australia funding, MRFF funding, MTP Connect, and we've had 2 Victorian Medical Research Acceleration funds as well. And again, a lot of these grants that we've been able to attract also involve other ACES partners. So I'll just want to highlight, I want to do a little bit like what Brett did and highlight the work from the students and show in these sort of orangey coloured box the impact beyond just their papers and beyond their PhD. So Lilith, as I said, she was the first graduate from Swinburne, and she was prolific at generating great data and getting publications. And so she was able to complete within 3 years and was able to do it by thesis by publication, which was very impressive and really did show her talent and due to all of her hard work and dedication she put in, I'm very fortunate to be able to have her still as a postdoc with me at Swinburne. So her thesis was on advanced structures for delivering of growth factors, and this fed into the SBS theme, where we were looking at delivering growth factors for various applications in muscle or tissue or nerve regeneration. So just a couple of the little projects that she did. The first one up here on the top here, you can see where she developed some emulsion methods to make these porous polymer scaffolds. They had various porosity on the outside, and we were able to use those as a cage template, which we could then backfill with alginate and growth factors. And so she was able to produce those and publish those, and we got that published in Soft Matter a couple of years ago. And then she moved on to still working on developing spheres, but now we were using a commercially available system called the Dolomite system that was purchased as part of the ACMD facility. So again, it was another benefit of being in a research organisation like that, is that you have access to instrumentation that you may not necessarily have. So she's been working on this Dolomite microfluidic system for quite a while now, and she's been able to generate, shown in this paper here that we've got published, alginate microspheres, and she was able to optimize that through the fluidic system. And she's been able to incorporate different growth factors for bone, cartilage, and muscle regeneration. And the impact, the impact beyond just her PhD and beyond the life of ACES is that now this technology and these materials that she was able to develop are feeding into other projects. The pancreatic cancer project that we've been working on with the OAW for quite a while now, that's been funded through Cancer Australia, and recently last year I was able to get a CAS Foundation grant to continue that. As I've already said, her work fed into the cartilage regeneration program, which is another joint program between University of Melbourne at St Vincent's and University of Wollongong and Swinburne. And the commercial impact, so we have impact on getting papers out there and good quality journals and multiple authors and what have you, but we also see some commercial impact coming out of here. So a lot of the technology that Lilith's been developing from this fluidic system is now feeding into a company or an entity that we set up called Cellular, and that's all about it's all about cartilage regeneration and looking at different strategies for cartilage regeneration and using the BioPen. And that's a combined effort between Uni Melbourne, Swinburne, and University of Wollongong. So we're continuing on the drug delivery program theme. This is the work by Sean. So his work was very much related to what Rob showed a bit earlier on the Brain on a Bench project. And this aligns with the EFD program. Sean's work was to incorporate his materials into the drug delivery side, which is shown here in the chip. Now, one of the things that when I did move to Swinburne, I interacted with other researchers there, and there was a small group of people working on gold nanoparticle and the use of gold nanoparticles and using plasmonic heating to influence cellular behaviour. So, and the two people working in that area is Paul Stoddard and Sally MacArthur at the time, and they're both associate investigators in ACES as well. So we got together and we were developing different drug delivery platforms using gold nanoparticles, which you can see here. So Sean's project was all about using thermally responsive polymers, such as this polynipam here, incorporating gold nanoparticles, and then using near-infrared light, shown here, to induce a surface plasmon response in the gold particles, which would then generate heat, which would then cause the polynipam to go to a thermal through its LCST, and we were using that phase transition for drug delivery. And so Sean was able to get a paper out in 2020. His thesis is still under examination. Now, in terms of impact beyond academia, Sean has now gone on. He's left Swinburne, and he's now a technician working in Agilent Technologies down here in Melbourne. But in terms of impact in the other projects, well, his project is also feeding into the pancreatic cancer project that we're doing with Wollongong. And a lot of the photonic and plasmonic properties and mechanisms that we learnt through Sean's project is also feeding into another initiative that we've got with the Baker Institute here in Melbourne, and so the work that we've done there is feeding into this PhD project with a joint PhD between Baker and Swinburne. Then we move into the next bit of work that Alex is doing. So Alex is just coming into his third year now, and he's working on developing soft compliant surfaces for cellular stimulation. And so we're taking the LCGO that David was just talking about, and we're blending that LCGO in with another material that we get from Wollongong, this methacrylated gelatin, so GELMA. So he's making these GELMA LCGO composites, and he's evaluating these and also evaluating the way that we can process these through 3D printing technologies. And he was able to get a publication last year in that. So this is just some of his work here, a schematic showing how we blend the two together and print them into different structures. And here's some of the electrical characterization where we can go from just simple cast films and a more concentrated cast film and all the way through to the 3D printed structures, and they still retain their electrochemical activity. So the idea for Alex's project is that we want to make a surface that is soft and compliant for neural tissue, but also has the ability to deliver electrical charge. And so he's also working on the incorporation of growth factors into this material and delivering that growth factors. And then he's now just about to start working on encapsulating some neural cells and investigating the electrical stimulation and characterization of that cellular response. And again, the impact beyond his project is that a lot of the work on the LCGO and growth factor interactions is being investigated in the cartilage project as well. He's been able to sort of show some interesting influences of the LCGO content in the GELMA in its ability to retain and deliver growth factors. So we can get very nice control of growth factor release from GELMA material by adding in different amounts of LCGO. So it's now reaching into the cartilage project as well. Now we'll move on to another area of work that we started with Daniela, who has now gone on. She's graduated and she's now a technician working in a startup company in Melbourne here called Cortical Labs. And her work was all about combining LCGO again with gold nanorods. And so you can see a schematic here where she's taking the LCGO, doing some very simple covalent chemistry using amine functionalized gold nanorods and making this LCGO gold nanorod composite, which is shown here under a TEM, and she was able to publish that in Advanced Healthcare Materials as well. So her project is all about optimizing the functionalization, forming these structures, and then evaluating cellular behavior on those structures. And the reason we were wanting to make these optical and electrical composites is that we're investigating the use of co-stimulation for cellular behavior variation. So we're looking at applying near-infrared optical stimulation along with electrical stimulation. And this also ties in closely with one of the associate investigator Paul Stoddard's work that he's doing down here in Melbourne, where they're looking at co-stimulation from a slightly different approach to what we're doing here. So Daniela's project was all about developing this composite, forming these films and characterizing their cellular behavior. And this little graph here just shows over 7 days, the number of neurites grown. So this black represents one neurite growth. 25% here shows 2. So what we can see, and the blue here shows 3 neurites. So we can see with her optimized material, as it goes out to a week, you actually start to get a preference of two neuronal bodies or 3 growing on the material. So it was an interesting finding, and she was able to show that the material's compatible for the cellular growth.
1 minute.
Thank you. And then we have our other student, Adriana, who's finishing off on her project, looking at increasing their gold content in the LCGO. And again, this feeds into the Swinburne Baker project on liposome delivery for thrombolytic treatment. So last slide here. I want to just talk about very briefly some commercial impact. So this is commercial impact that arose from the ACES interaction. So this is the sort of interactions and the results you get that you never anticipated when you go in and start working on ACES projects. So there was 3 of us working from different institutions, Swinburne, Wollongong at the time, and Deakin, and the person from Deakin is Ren Green, and the Wollongong was Rob and Anita and myself at Swinburne. We were able to get a DP in 2018, and we're able to develop during that DP some unique surface chemistry that was able to sense cancer biomarkers in our whole unprocessed blood. So about a 50 microliter of unprocessed blood, and we can detect those cancer biomarkers down to about 5 peak molar levels, and you get a response time in 30 seconds. So we put we did some IP disclosure documents, and then we approached a company called Universal Biosensors. We were already partnering up with a company called Lubris Biopharma in the US, and through some negotiations, we were able to, in 2021, we were able to secure a commercial licensing agreement, IP acquisition with revenue sharing back to the universities. And out of that's come a lot of industry interaction and translation, where we've just signed off on a Swinburne UBI fellowship for Simon Silver, and Deakin have a similar fellowship for Ren Green. So it's a nice example of sort of unexpected outcomes coming from ACES interactions. And the working with Universal Biosensors is hectic. It's full on. They're really pushing hard to get a product out, and they're anticipating that they should get a point of care oncology sensor launched within the next 3 years based on the IP that they've acquired from here, from this interaction. And we've also partnered with them in other state and federal government joint operations and applications. So overall impact, we've been able to generate new scientific knowledge. We've been able to get knowledge in commercial relevance, get knowledge with commercial relevance and impact. We've produced industry-ready graduates, and we're securing funding to expand upon Swinburne and ACES programs into other areas. We're building industry partnerships and training academic researchers to be able to work with industry and help commercialize and translate. And more importantly, from what we saw in Doug and David's talk, and with this example with Universal Biosensors, we're able to now start to retain IP that's been generated in Australia, keeping it in Australia and working with Australian companies, which I think is a really good thing. So that's my last slide, and thank you for attention. Take questions.
Thank you, Simon. We can take quick questions. Okay.
No worries.
So if we don't have any questions, we'll thank Simon and we'll move on to Tillmann. Thank you, Simon. So our next speaker is Tillmann. He will talk about our entrepreneurial course and what entrepreneurs we are generating from ACES. So over to you, Tillmann.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a tough gig looking at the line of speakers that came ahead of me, and I'm actually quite grateful to be part of this. Because I was reflecting before putting this presentation together, it's not necessarily the impact that we've created with our entrepreneurship innovation program, but also the impact this program had on myself. So the slide that I'm showing at the moment was taken in 2019, the good old days when we could still meet at the Sydney Business School and in person, spending a week on the rocks. And the objective is not to create entrepreneurs. The objective was to teach engineering PhD students a fresh lens at looking at their research and their environment. And from there you have spillover effects. And I'll come to that in a minute, but it's not only the next generation entrepreneur, it's also the next generation researcher. Before I kick in, I just want to briefly acknowledge country. I'm here on Darwin country, and this is pictures taken at home. I'm blessed living in such a nice environment, and I want to pay my respect to the traditional custodians of this land, past, present, and emerging. So what have we achieved? Partially why I signed up to this and joined John, Glyn, and Attila, and Gordon, and the team of ACES is because when I first came to Australia, to Wollongong University, I found the left-hand side picture. It's the ivory tower analogy that we're using, and I'm not going to convert this into a rant about the universities. It's changing, but what we are now seeing more so is universities in 2030 will need to tackle global challenges, which you're doing, which is fantastic, especially like the work that I've seen claim an active and civic role, address community needs and contribution to their prosperity, and prepare new graduates and upskill the workforce for the knowledge economy. So the claim of fame with the Entrepreneurship Innovation Program is to prepare those students. And we heard from previous speakers as well that, you know, some students went on and had startup companies, consulting and so forth. They found a way, and in that we help them to understand their surroundings, their environment, understand where the opportunity lies, and for them to then pave them a pathway that they can walk down. This picture I put in because for me, time is actually circular, it's not linear. Universities at some point have lost their way, and it's great that, you know, the team of ACES had this foresight to change the way we're walking. So top left corner is Bologna. And if Pavel is still here, on the right-hand side is Krakow, top right-hand side. So universities used to be an active and civic member of our societies. This is what the people were serving. And then we created all these super mega campuses and trenched away from our societal duties. And so by now enabling students and paving pathways and developing these partnerships with industries and training them in that way, creates kind of that circularity in knowledge sharing and knowledge creation. I've only stepped into this place about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've inherited from John. So John Glynn kicked this off with Attila and Gordon back in the days. And he was an aeronautical engineer. He's here with us today. And he stated to me that boundaries like schools and faculties are not helpful when trying to be creative and innovative. Work outside of the university is usually multidisciplinary, and you and I were fortunate that ACES recognized the need for business school input. Science researchers can have great ideas, but generally lack essential skills in terms of commercialization with all that requires, not at least of which are protecting intellectual property, contract arrangements, supply chain, and so on. So this is not a criticism. This is more, hey, everything that is achieved outside in the workplace is done in interdisciplinary teams. So by bringing that business school, the innovation, commercialization aspects in, we've created this environment for them and create that fresh lens on their research. It's like, I'm not just trying to solve a knowledge problem, but hey, what opportunities come out of that, and then the impact that it has created. I personally struggle with the concept of impact, especially when it comes to teaching and education. I looked it up on Google, as you do when you don't know what that actually means to you, and you get over 2 billion results. So the problem that I have in particular is, what is my claim of fame? Because with any impact, there's time delays, there are ripple effects, unknown ripples, and then, which I haven't heard today so far, is what are the adverse negative effects, you know, and time will tell. So what I did instead is I went back to some of the students that I taught over the time. Some of them are which here, some of them who commercialized, and asked them what impact we have created in their mind. Because in the exit service of PhD students, the talk or this particular course around entrepreneurship and innovation is featured very high on their list, something refreshing, something different where they can collaborate and talk more openly about the research they're conducting in the environment, being connected to other ACES centers. All of that engagement, that collaboration helps, especially a PhD being such a selfish thing. So we take them on a journey to create that new lens and immerse them into that network environment. So we have this team approach. We get them to develop their ideas, but then it comes down to how you communicate your ideas, this pitch training and practice. And we communicate and how you communicate to a wider audience. And it takes a long time to tease some of that expert knowledge, the language around that expert knowledge out. But then what we also do is we open up our networks. So we have successful startup entrepreneurs coming to our classes. We have George Tomka and his commercialization team joining us, so that you understand, or we had iAccelerate joining in. So you understand what the ecosystem looks like and where you start and who do you contact first when an idea comes to mind, something you want to commercialize. So it's not so much here's the textbook approach to entrepreneurship and innovation, or we're actually exposing them. So if you're serious about an idea, this is where you go, and this is how you need to present it, and this is how you need to communicate it. So we get them more industry ready. So the student number one, and I didn't ask for permission to expose them, but if you feel free to expose yourself, if you find your words in this. The course allowed me to gain a different perspective beyond fundamental research, and also removed some of the barriers and fears when thinking about the steps towards commercialization. The course was a catalyst for realizing the challenges involved in commercialization and the need of building a team with different skills in order to tackle those challenges. It also provided some skills on how to perform a technology pitch presentations from a marketing point of view, while avoiding technicalities. The course has definitely changed the way I do science. So that's a fantastic representation of the things that we set out to do, what we wanted to do, and the impact that it has created for the student in the environment and beyond. Thanks for your effort in running the Innovation Entrepreneurship course. Contributions from people like George, Tomka, and team were great. Hearing about you, Attila, and Sparky Fiber and Build Quick added authenticity to the idea that we don't have to be in Silicon Valley to do startup. It helps to be in Silicon Valley, but you don't have to be. That's right. We have an ecosystem, the exposure to the ecosystem. But what it also means is the way we've tackled this teaching approach, again, beyond textbook, is we're teaching from experience. I don't want to bore you with all the detail, but my first invention was an app, which was great, but there wasn't any business feasibility, but you can teach from your own failures as well as successes. The second one was Sparky Fiber, the electrification of fiber optic cables, which Attila and I started off with iAccelerate, where it was technically feasible. We've proven that there was a business case for it, but the mining industry in particular was not very interested in it. So we actually didn't progress this further. I mean, it's dead. And then I ventured further, went into some consultancy, and then Build Quick at the end was the one where we actually commercializing international patents in construction. But you're learning from failure, you're learning from experiences, and all of these experiences we pass on to our students. So therefore, which goes back to the previous students' impact comment. Student number 3, the E&I course was a brilliant opportunity to further develop the translational aspects of my PhD research. It especially motivated me to think about the next stage of my work, post-PhD, and potential pathways to test the developed co-design model for meaningful research impact. So I had the opportunity to contribute conceptual insights and project design ideas advanced during the course towards the Victorian government grant application for funding of disaster reduction and resilient initiatives. The co-design model developed by our interdisciplinary team during the E&I course seems particularly useful for supporting communities to undertake locally identified and locally led resilience building initiatives. Now here the course has then directly resulted in identification of funding opportunity and the pursuing of the same. So we are an absolute enabler of the research teams within ACES. And the last one, and I think some of you might have seen this already, I attended the week-long R&E workshop in the first year of my PhD candidature, and I found the experience and knowledge I received to have had a lasting impact on how I view my research. The workshop clearly outlined the process of commercialization and the common hurdles scientists faced when going through this process. Understanding this process clearly enabled me to restructure my research to protect future commercialization opportunities, protection of IP, and understanding what is needed for a patent. of my research, some opportunities I'm currently following up by going through the patent process. Due to my research being research and development focused, the real world examples and people met during the INE workshop instilled in me the concept of end user focus. This has changed my view on how to develop my research into a commercial product. As such, I incorporated an element of end user engagement into my research to understand how I can develop my product to meet their needs rather than me telling them what they need. This has so far been quite beneficial. I would highly recommend for any researcher, even those who do not think of their research as commercializable, they will benefit the most from this. So I collected more impact statements from students because I think it's far more valuable to hear from students what they think how it has contributed than rather for me claiming what it might have done. For me, we've met the objective. We wanted to develop a fresh lens for research students on their research. As we heard from David and others, they ventured on and they did it. They started a consulting business. And some of these students were part of this course, seized different opportunities. In total, 111 students between 2016 and 2021 have taken part in this course. And I had the pleasure of meeting most of them, even though I've inherited this course from John. And I'd say if we had this impact on most of them or on half of them, then what a fantastic outcome. This approach was ahead of its time. So the University Steel Research Hub came to me and says, can we do this? We're now talking about an UOW-wide rollout with iAccelerate. So there is a lot more appetite from the center to do a lot more with it. So in a way, it was ahead of its time. We've changed perception, we've changed communication. So actually, students learn how to communicate more effectively to non-experts in their field, and attitude towards commercialization.
1 minute.
I borrow from Jerry, screw it, let's do it. This is kind of the attitude is coming through a lot more so, and also the change in the landscape that we've contributed to as well. But are prepared to navigate the changing landscape and improvement of our local ecosystem. I talked about the adverse effects because clearly there must be adverse effects somewhere, but they're not known to me as of yet. If you know of any, I would like to know.
Thank you, gentlemen. Do we have any questions? Yeah, David.
Tillmann, you've finished on the same cartoon as you started with, surely not.
But this is
after that inspiring talk, you must have broken down some of those bits of the tower.
I think we collectively have disrupted that tower quite nicely, and we continue to do so. But this is what really has drawn me to it, because business as usual is boring, and this is something different and refreshing, and it comes without marking, which is awesome.
Well done.
If you don't have any more questions, we'll move on to Maria for our closing remarks. So with that, let's thank all the speakers for today. And I'll hand it over to Maria to close the session. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for that amazing set of talks today. Actually, I mean, just realizing what a journey we've been on over the last. Well, for me, actually, it's 2 decades, more than 2 decades. 2001 was probably when we first had that very first initial small centre of excellence, ACNE, and wow, where have we come in that time? I've grown up in ACES, so for me, it's just it's actually quite a emotional day for me, because it really is. I wish we was face to face and we were actually able to talk to each other and celebrate the achievements and the impact. But that's not to be. We're still on this Zoom platform. But, you know, what I'm going to talk about, not the great science we've been doing or the entrepreneur courses or any of the research training, but just the people. I mean, really, ACES is about people, and it's about the fact that we've grown so many young people from whether they've become entrepreneurs and had their own businesses or whether they've become their own professors in their own right over the last 2 decades. We've got this plethora of alumni around the world. And I think that's what I want to remember in these last few minutes here, and thank everyone for their contributions to that. I can just, right. So I've just been dragged some photographs off my desktop, off my hard drive actually, and whatever I could find from the last few years. So we used to run, as all of you know, in February, this time of the year, we'd always run the Electromaterials Symposium, ACES, either in Wollongong or at Monash or at Deakin. And here are a couple that we ran in Victoria. In 2012, we had the session down in Geelong in Gordon's old haunts, and then in 2016 we had it in Burwood. And just some of the people there, you might recognise some of the amazing colleagues and people we've worked with over the years. Some we've lost. So we talked about people we've lost before. We've lost Austin Angel, obviously, and Simone Delou, the modelling mentor that many of us had, and just talking before about people like Ren, who was a young postdoc when he joined the team back in 2011, 2012, and now, you know, what he's achieved through ACES, through actually having that collaboration through ACES, what he's achieved now with the UBI and the commercialisation of his work, his and Simon's and the others' work. So really quite an amazing journey over those 2 years. And then I want to remind people also about the size of the people who used to turn up to these symposia and how it grew with years, right? In 2012, we had a cohort of about 100 and something down in Geelong, and then in 2016, this enormous, massive group of people in Burwood. And the breadth of research that we've done, as we saw today, the breadth across chemistry, biology, engineering, mechatronics, the research training that we've given our students. I mean, I am enormously proud of that. I'm very proud to have been part of this, of ACES. I'm very sad that I tried to lead another Centre of Excellence. We didn't get past the expression of interest phase. I'm very sad and I feel a bit disappointed that this is kind of the end, in effect, of the Centre of Excellence. But it's not actually the end of the collaborations and the work, of course. We've got training centres, we've got arena grants, we've got CRCPs. There are a whole lot of other mechanisms by which, of course, we will continue to work together and inspire the next generation of researchers, both with fundamental research, which is super important. ACES legacy goes all the way from doing high quality, the highest quality fundamental research, from the work that Michelle Coots and my own team did in the modelling area, through to the amazing synthetic capabilities that David and Jenny and Doug brought to the ACES, through to all that, the applications and the prototyping that have been seen across all manner of different, someone said widgets before, but I won't call them widgets, all manner of different translational activities, which are very important for, of course, the future of our world, cleaner society, and I guess also I'm very proud of the fact that we've had this amazing connection, interdisciplinary connection with ethics and education as well, being part of what we've done in ACES, not just the science and the engineering, but also training our students in other very important aspects of what it means to be a scientist and a good citizen, a good scientific citizen. But none of that really can be done without leadership. Centres of Excellence requires excellence in leadership, and people across all of ACES, I think, were outstanding leaders in many, many ways, empowering people, inspiring people, sharing a vision with the people within ACES and outside of ACES, and led change, but no one more so than our illustrious leader, if I can find it, Gordon. So I actually want to say a very personal thank you to Gordon. This is an old photo, Gordon. I couldn't find a more recent one of you, but an old one from one of our ACES symposia up in Wollongong, I think. So thank you. I think on behalf of everybody, I think who's currently in the end of ACES and all the way over the last 2 decades that I've been involved with ACES. Thank you for being an inspiring leader. Thank you for sharing your vision and helping us take so many people to the next on their journey and beyond. So I look forward to working with many of you in the future. But for now, I guess this is the end of current ACES, I suppose. So thank you again to everybody, to Gordon, to Sam, to everyone who's helped put this together as well today. And that's it. Goodbye. So long. Farewell, as they say.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.